We're going to get into gas, liquefied petroleum gas here in Nigeria, looking at a report from the Bureau of Statistics, the LPG gas price watch. Now, of course, we saw that figure fall year on year, and we're very happy to have Mr. Felix Ekundayo, who is the Managing Director of Asiko Energy. He's also the President of the NLPGA, Nigerian Liquefied Petroleum Gas Association. You're very welcome, sir. Good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
So I wanted to get your thoughts here. That report from the Bureau for 5 kilogram cylinders, 12 kg cylinders, we saw a month-on-month and year-on-year decline in June. What do you make of that development as far as the price movements?
The price movements I would allocate mostly to the drop in oil prices. Okay, so we're not isolated. We relate with the global community. So where there's a fall in oil prices, of course, we benefit. Where it goes up, it impacts us. So the drop that you're referring to specifically is actually probably more to do with international oil prices.
Okay, now thanks for that. So there's the divergence, or rather the movements. I would say divergence because I wanted to ask you about, I guess, logistics in moving LPG around, because for the states, you've got some states where it's higher than others. What's the dynamic there?
Okay, I saw some of those statistics. Some of it can be allocated to logistics, but not all of it. Our logistics are really not that expensive in the country. So I'd say probably my own expectation for the 5 kg that you mentioned, 500 naira, maybe less, maximum. For the 12.5 kg, maybe 1,000 naira, okay? So, but for it to be much higher, as the NBC or NBS data shows, then it's one of maybe timing of data, maybe a local shortage, right? But certainly not logistics. Our transportation costs in Nigeria are not that expensive.
Okay, so what about the infrastructure around the country? Because can't LPG be piped across the country?
It is not generally recommended to pipe LPG. It's kind of it fits into its own particular bucket.
Yeah.
Right. So natural gas you can pipe, petroleum products, crude oil you can pipe because of their volume. LPG sits in its own little niche, right? The more efficient method of moving is in parcels. Bring it in ship parcels, move it in truck parcels, distribute it in cylinder parcels. So that's the more preferred method. Unless you're at industrial scale, and I mean really, really large petrochemicals, it's not usually piped. Anywhere you go in the world, it's usually trucked.
Okay. So looking at the exchange rates liberalization that's taken place, you were mentioning oil prices. Now, I believe majority of the volumes are imported, is that right, as far as LPG?
It's actually a balance, about 50-50.
50-50.
Right? People tend to focus on the coastal arrivals and call them imports.
Okay.
But a good portion of those coastal arrivals come from our own companies, Nigeria LNG, Mobiloso, but mostly Nigeria LNG. So because it's arriving by ship, people assume it's an import product. It's not. It's roughly about balance in terms of what the import volumes are and what locally produced volumes are.
Okay, so for the 50% that's brought in, there's an exchange rate impact, isn't there?
Yes, correct.
There is.
Correct. And for that, to answer your question on the exchange rate, yes, it has always been. Historically, it's been on the parallel market rate. Now, with the liberalization of exchange rates, what's likely to happen is that most local producers will benchmark on CBN.
Right.
So that will rise. But the market price usually has been benchmarked against the parallel market anyway.
Okay, right. Okay, gotcha. So with crude oil prices, I think there's some forecasts for it to rise in the latter half of the year.
Yes.
So is that going to be the major catalyst with respect to where the price outlook for LPG?
Yes. The biggest component at the moment in terms of our own expectations is in terms of if oil prices rise. Gas prices will rise as a consequence. Other elements that are associated with it in terms of shipping costs have actually come down. Okay. Right? So you are quite correct. That is the likely source of any potential uptick in pricing. Okay.
Then on the, again, back to the 50-50 balance, what about the does clearing customs, does that come into this at all as far as bringing it in, or what's the?
Okay, so it's not just, I wouldn't point fingers at just one agency. Customs is one. We have a whole proliferation of agencies, multiple taxations, multiple levies, which we are still contending with, and these are kind of a fallout. One of the less celebrated or welcome aspects of the PIA, the Petroleum Industry Act. We made several representations before the PIA was implemented,
Yeah.
right? Including submitting, I think it was 188 copies of our joint industry analysis of where the issues would be in the PIA. I can give you an idea as to how much engagement we got from that.
Right.
Absolutely zero.
Wow.
But we are beginning to see what the consequence of those impacts are. Multiple levies, new levies by the authority, a percentage-based levy on consumption. All of these things are significant challenges.
Well, I mean, recently the president did put together a new tax committee. His special advisor on revenue has said, I think it's Zacchaeus Adediji, has said that they want to harmonize taxes. They got the Taiwo Oyedele from PwC to run it. So were you hopeful then that maybe going forward, less taxes or?
NLPGA will become hopeful when they engage us. They haven't engaged us yet, so it's really just a soundbite as far as I'm concerned, as far as we're concerned. The situation where your regulatory authorities levy you, tax you on your sales is nothing to do with what service they're meant to be providing you. Right. You can conceive a situation where FIRS starts to charge you for mileage traveled, or any other industry starts to say, okay, they will charge you for your production. What they should be charging you for is the service they provide you, right? And we're not really seeing that at present.
As far as the infrastructure, well, actually, can we cater to domestic demand for LPG?
Do you mean with local production?
With local production.
Okay. So the question kind of relates to whether or not we want imports, right? Or whether or not we have an issue with imports. And I think we get a little bit too emotive about imports.
Yeah.
Imports are not necessarily a bad thing, right?
Yeah, we demonize them here.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but when you look at it, imports actually created a unique situation in Nigeria. Nigeria has a price hump. The most expensive place for LPG, or the higher price place for LPG, is actually the Middle Belt. Why? Because you had coastal imports for the south area, and you had hinterland imports from Niger, Zinda refinery, for the northern areas. So places like Zamfara, Kano, and the rest actually benefited from a reduced price, which then boosted demand in those areas.
Gotcha. I need to really pick your brain on compressed natural gas. And this whole talk, the governor of Ogun State, I believe, Dr. Abiodun, announcing that for the old part of the palliatives that they will be converting some minibuses from fuel to CNG. Even the last administration talks about it. Can you help us out with what you think about this development, whether or not cost implications, if it's even possible, and so on and so forth?
Okay, in terms of cost implications, yes, it's possible. In terms of cost, gas is always going to be cheaper than fuels in a deregulated market and in a non-subsidized market. Okay, one of the things that held gas back in the past were fuel subsidies. That's a thing of history. Now, to address CNG particularly, CNG is a compressed natural gas. I focus on the NG part. There are actually two categories of fuel that we move around: natural gas, LPG. Broadly speaking, we represent the LPG industry. There are associations, the Nigerian Gas Association, that represents the natural gas industry. But we recognize that there's this almost tension that is being created, which is unnecessary. They are related products, right? So CNG is going to be a part of the energy mix, right? LNG is going to be part of the energy mix. PNG, pipeline natural gas, will be a part of the energy mix. But they are not the only products out there for the energy mix that Nigeria needs. LPG will be there, propane, butane will be there, which are all family of the LPG. So what we really need to do, and what we are doing, is coming together, right, to create a narrative that is explains to authorities, regulators, consumers, manufacturers, what the different fuels available are, and where, depending on your location, which mix is better for you. So when you get to the north, CNG is not going to be viable. LNG will be, LPG is going to be viable. So having this balance where you can use one or both is beneficial to everybody.
Yeah.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all conversation.
So when you say CNG is not going to be available in the northern part, that means this conversion you're talking about is not viable?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
Conversion is viable any engine can take a fuel that it is designed for.
Okay.
So if the issue is this, I can get CNG to Kano, but it's going to be very expensive.
Yeah.
Because the energy density of CNG is not high.
Right.
Okay. The energy density of LNG, which is the same product but in liquid form, is high. So the transport element becomes much cheaper. So transportation is almost like an exponential curve. The further you go, the more expensive it becomes. Right. So from that perspective, right, why would we waste infrastructure expense on moving a product that is difficult to move because of the form that is in, rather than spending a fraction of that cost on the liquid form or on LPG? So there is a conversation to be had as to say, okay, if you're in Zamfara, if you're in Maiduguri, if you're in Abuja, what is the ideal mix that gives consumers the lowest cost of energy? And that's what we're about. And that's what the other associations have agreed that we're about.
Fantastic. Thank you for the breakdown. Okay, fuel subsidies have been removed. Nigerians are facing a cost of living crisis, disposable income squeeze. You think that's going to impact how much LPG they purchase in cylinders going forward?
Most certainly. Most certainly. Even though the cost of the gas hasn't gone up, the ability to buy it has reduced. Right. And one of the things people tend to sacrifice early is expenditure on energy. Right. They will find alternatives to use. So it is a concern for us. We saw in the first quarter of this year with the Naira swap or Naira change, a sharp decline in LPG consumption. Right? People were just not buying. Either they resorted to firewood or they were going without. Now that there's a further attack on people's personal income, that is again a worry for Q3, Q4. Right.
What do you want to see we're rounding up and we're a couple minutes to go, but as an association, you as a player in this space, what do you most want to see as far as the space is concerned? Is it a movement from more dialogue with government, or what do you want to see as far as LPG is concerned?
Dialogue with government would be good, but dialogue only gets you so far. Dialogue means at least you are engaged, right? Proactive action is far more important. Yes, we want to dialogue with government. We have dialogued with government in the past. What has happened is that then didn't go beyond dialogue. It was just a tick box for them to say they have engaged stakeholders, and it was meaningless. Dialogue, yes. Move forward to developing viable plans and executing on those viable plans. There are already enough institutional systems in place that can grow gas demand in this country fourfold in the next 5 years. We currently do maybe 1.5 million tons, just under, right? We can get to 6 million tons and above with very, very few corrective measures, right? So what's the point of talking if you're not going to go and follow it through? The biggest beneficiary of gas utilization in Nigeria is the government, right? Balance of payments, less forex, all of those kind of things. You're using a local resource. So it's been always a bit of a wonder why we don't get more traction in these conversations. So yes, dialogue, plans, and follow-up action.
With action.
Yes.
Dialogue, plans, and action. Excellent. Nice spots to end our interview. Very informative, and thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Felix Ekundayo, Managing Director, Asiko Energy, and the President of the NLPGA. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Great stuff.